She had come to this world not by choice, but as consequence. A disgraced human engineer cast out from a failed colonial project, she now lived alone on the humid edge of the alien jungle, a forgotten remnant of Earth's ambition. The settlement had collapsed years ago, but she remained, surviving in silence amid the ruins of solar panels and broken tech, shunned by both her own kind and the native species. The Vishari had made it clear, humans were not welcome after the mining war scorched their sacred lands. She hadn't picked up a weapon, but guilt didn't ask for direct involvement. Her days were silent routines, purifying water, tending soil, collecting medicinal herbs she barely understood. It was a life carved from penance, made more bearable by her obsession with repair. She fixed what she could, from cracked irrigation pumps to half-burnt books. Anything to pretend she could undo what had been done. Alone, she spoke only to herself or to the broken machines around her. One afternoon, as the wind carried the scent of wet moss and iron, she heard a sound that didn't belong. Not a Vishari howl or jungle growl, but a high-pitched, panicked cry. It was brief, then again, sharp and strained. Her instincts twitched. Against her better judgment, she moved toward it, stepping lightly over root-veined earth and weaving between giant blossoms that pulsed like hearts. The river appeared below, a roaring current swollen from recent rain. Amidst the churning white and silver foam, something thrashed. A small creature, tangled in reeds, flailing with a quiet desperation. At first she thought it was another native animal, until she saw the pattern, a sleek coat with sapphire and obsidian markings that shimmered against the current. Its limbs were long and feline, yet its eyes, even from a distance, reflected thought. A Vishari cub. Not just any. The gleam of its fur and golden collar signified a royal lineage. Sacred. Hunted by none, touched by few. She hesitated, just a heartbeat. Saving it could be seen as abduction. Or worse, desecration. But watching it slip beneath the surface with a weak gurgle tore the hesitation apart. She dropped her gear and leapt. The current slammed into her. Cold, fierce, filled with debris. She fought it with grim determination, arms burning as she pushed against the river's wrath. The cub was nearly still when she reached it, limbs limp and eyes fluttering. She grabbed its scruff and held it tight, turning her body to shield it from rocks as she kicked back toward shore. Pain lanced through her shoulder when she hit a submerged log, but she didn't let go. Dragging them both onto the bank, she collapsed, soaked and gasping. The cub wheezed, water sputtering from its narrow snout. She pressed its chest, tilted its head, whispered desperate instructions to herself. The tiny thing convulsed, then vomited water and let out a pitiful sound. Alive. Her arms shook as she cradled it. Its eyes blinked once, cloudy but intelligent. Recognition passed between them, though not of names or meanings. Just one truth: she had chosen to save it when others wouldn't have. The rain began again, fine and cool, washing blood from a gash on her forearm. She wrapped the cub in her coat, heart pounding. Every moment she held it was a risk. The Vishari revered their royals, but they also believed in sacred separation. A human touching such a creature could be seen as blasphemy. But the cub shivered, mewling softly, and she couldn't let it go. She whispered a comfort it wouldn't understand. "I've got you." She hiked back quickly, cutting through the brush with urgency, making sure no patrols spotted her. Each step was a calculation: how to hide it, how to keep it warm, how to explain the scars if anyone asked. But explanations didn't matter. Not now. Life did. Her shelter, half buried in vines and rust, barely kept out the wind. She cleared a space by the generator's warmth and laid the cub on layered blankets. She took stock: minor bruising, shallow lacerations, hypothermia. She administered a mild painkiller from her dwindling supply, then wrapped it tighter. For hours she didn't move, watching its chest rise and fall, wondering what force in the universe had placed her there at that moment. Her exile had been silent punishment. But today, it had purpose. Outside, the jungle pulsed with ancient rhythm. In the dim light of a flickering bulb, she looked down at the small alien curled in her arms. For the first time in years, her breath slowed not from fear or exhaustion, but calm. She didn't know what the Vishari would do if they found out. She only knew this: she hadn't saved the cub because it was royal, or intelligent, or sacred. She had saved it because it was drowning. And that was enough. The cub's condition remained fragile through the night. She monitored its shallow breaths, adjusting its temperature with a heated blanket rigged to a solar cell. Its eyes fluttered intermittently, pupils dilating in the low light as if assessing whether it had awoken into danger. She administered a diluted electrolyte solution, drop by drop, using a syringe made for human infants. Each time its tongue flicked in response, her pulse eased slightly. By dawn, its heartbeat had stabilized, though its limbs remained limp. She prepared a nutrient paste based on a mix of local fruit pulp and trace proteins. Guesswork, but it was better than starvation. The cub refused at first, growling with surprising force for its size. It attempted to crawl, claws half extended in defense. She didn't flinch. Instead, she crouched, lowered her gaze, and offered the food from an open palm. Hunger overruled suspicion. The creature licked, then ate, albeit cautiously. Hours became days. The cub's movements grew stronger, its gaze sharper. It observed her closely, studying every motion, how she poured water, how she adjusted circuit panels, how she spoke to herself when deep in thought. It tracked her like prey, not from malice but instinctive curiosity. She encouraged interaction without touching unless necessary. She learned the hard way after a swipe left a shallow gash on her hand. The cub didn't behave like an ordinary animal. It showed calculated behavior, waiting for her to finish tasks before approaching, refusing food it didn't recognize, and responding to environmental changes with alertness that bordered on tactical awareness. It had a pattern to its movements, circling her shelter in loops, pausing at weak spots in her wall, scanning for openings or threats. Each day it spent healing was also a day learning. She spoke to it constantly, not expecting understanding, but maintaining presence. Her voice, calm and measured, became background rhythm to its recovery. She called it Ashka, a word she once read in a Vishari glyph tablet meaning light found in ruin. It didn't respond to the name for 2 days. Then, one morning, she said it softly, and it looked at her directly for the first time with recognition. Trust was a process, not a moment. She left her door open during the day, allowing it to step outside if it wished. It never went far. It inspected her water purifier, then her broken drone parts, then curled up beside the heating coil near the solar battery. It wasn't loyalty. It was cautious comfort. She modified a collar from a salvage translator node, one she'd been adapting for years but never tested. The chip was basic, only capable of linking known Vishari vocal tones to human approximations. She wasn't sure if it would work on a cub. She approached with slow movements, collar visible in her open hand. Ashka hissed. She paused, waited. A long breath later, the cub stepped forward, sniffed it, and allowed her to fasten it. No growl. No strike. That night, it slept closer to her bedding. 3 days later, the collar emitted its first phrase. A clipped, half-garbled approximation. No, cold, safe. She froze, unsure if the device was interpreting sound or sentiment. The cub didn't seem surprised. It nudged her with its snout and returned to sleep. From then on, Ashka's presence altered everything. Her schedule shifted to match its habits. When it paced, she followed. When it refused food, she revised ingredients. It mimicked her behaviors, touching tools with its claws, tapping at lights, tilting its head when she adjusted pressure gauges. She began to believe it understood more than she could measure. She caught herself smiling when it chased the light of her laser cutter across the floor or clumsily attempted to mimic her nod. It began emitting low, melodic chirps when content, sound that echoed in the shelter like alien lullabies. It no longer recoiled from her touch. On the 7th day, while she catalogued medical herbs, Ashka padded over, placed its paw on her foot, and vocalized through the translator. Stay warm. Ashka. It was not a full sentence, but its meaning was deliberate. Her throat tightened. She didn't reply, just reached out and let her hand rest gently on its head. She had once believed her time on this world would end in silence. her name forgotten, her purpose dissolved. But now, this unlikely bond pulsed with meaning. No one would believe her if she told them. Maybe she didn't need them to. Ashka had nearly drowned. She had nearly disappeared. Yet here they both were, breathing the same air, sharing a quiet trust neither planned for. They found her on the 10th morning. A Vishari scouting unit, lean and agile, emerged from the jungle without warning. Their armor was layered in matte obsidian plates, eyes glowing faintly with embedded sensory tech. She had taken Ashka to the river again, hoping the flowing water might help its recovery further. The moment the scouts saw the cub curled against her side, their weapons rose in synchronized motion. She didn't run. She placed herself between them and Ashka without thinking. Shouts in sharp, guttural Vishari echoed through the clearing. The cub growled back, stepping forward, but the scouts were already moving. She was disarmed and restrained within seconds. Ashka roared, but one scout approached carefully and lifted the cub with practiced reverence. No harm, no force, just formality. That's when she realized they recognized him. This wasn't just any royal cub. It was someone they had mourned. They dragged her back through the jungle, weapons ever pointed her way. Ashka was carried ahead of her, comforted, spoken to softly in a language she couldn't translate without the collar, which they had removed. When they reached the cliffside temple city, she was met with cold silence. Dozens of Vishari watched as she was led through arched walkways carved from crystal-veined stone. Some hissed. Others turned away. Her presence was not just a violation. It was sacrilege. She was thrown to her knees before the High Circle, a tribunal of ancient Vishari leaders whose expressions were impossible to read. They sat atop stone thrones arranged in a crescent, each draped in ceremonial cloths patterned with shifting glyphs. Their spokesperson, an elder with silver horns and voice like splitting ice, accused her of trespass, theft, and soul-tainting a sacred bloodline. Ashka stood beside the tribunal now, fur-groomed and body free of injury. He didn't look at her. The collar remained off. The elders listed potential punishments: exile beyond the jungle's edge, public memory erasure, or execution. No defense had been permitted. Then Ashka moved. Deliberate and silent, he stepped from the dais and walked directly to her. The room fell still. He nudged her with his head and emitted a short, broken vocalization. "Safe found. Ashka." It was unmistakable. The collar hadn't spoken, the words had come from the cub's mouth, imperfect yet real. Gasps rippled through the chamber. One of the youngest among the elders stood abruptly, eyes wide. Protocol faltered. A low murmur spread across the court. The elder who had threatened her narrowed his eyes and demanded explanation. She was finally permitted to speak. Her voice didn't shake. She explained what she'd done, not to claim credit, but to establish fact. She described pulling him from the river, treating his wounds, feeding him from a diet designed through deduction and desperation. She spoke of his behaviors, his speech development, his willingness to stay. She didn't ask for mercy. She demanded recognition of what had already occurred. They didn't interrupt. When she finished, the chamber fell silent once more. The elder with silver horns scoffed and called for ritual judgment. A trial of intent. Ancient, invasive, and rarely invoked. It would determine whether her motivations aligned with truth or deception through direct psychic resonance. A probe into her mind, fully witnessed. She didn't hesitate. There was no lie to protect. The process began quickly. A glass sphere filled with bioluminescent mist was lowered over her head, glowing with a pulsing blue light. One elder placed clawed hands on either side of her temples. A deep hum began. Memories surged. They saw her arriving on the planet, hopeful and naive. The diplomatic failure, the public disgrace, her self-imposed exile. They felt her guilt when the war began, saw the burns on her hands from trying to save a collapsing irrigation line no one cared about. They experienced her loneliness, her silence, the way she still planted trees each season in soil that wouldn't hold them. Then came the rescue, Ashka's flailing body in the river, the panic, the blood in her mouth from being struck by a rock, and the weight of him in her arms as she refused to let go. They saw the careful feeding, the sleepless nights, the collar, the name, the moment he spoke it back. They felt what she felt, not pity, not duty, but connection. The light faded. The elder released her, trembling. He turned to the others and bowed his head. She meant no harm, he said. She gave without seeking. One by one, the others nodded. The tribunal ruled in her favor. She was not a trespasser. She was not a thief. She was, by their judgment, a guardian, a title lost for generations. Ashka returned to her side on his own. The guards did not interfere. No chains. No condemnation. For the first time since exile, her freedom was not stolen. It was earned. After the verdict, they didn't send her back to the outskirts. Instead, they gave her temporary quarters near the lower sanctum of the city, modest, clean, and carefully guarded. The air there smelled of incense and mineral-rich stone, a far cry from the wet greenery she had grown used to. Despite the quiet respect now shown by the Vishari citizens, she remained watched, studied, never truly alone. But it was no longer hostility. It was something else, curiosity laced with uncertainty. Ashka visited her daily, slipping past formalities as only the young could. He no longer flinched when others addressed her in his presence. If anything, he stood closer, tail flicking defensively whenever a stranger came too near. His behavior had shifted. He wasn't just mimicking her anymore. He was adopting her habits, reading the way she scanned rooms, how she paused before answering, how she used silence to weigh intentions. Soon, they brought her into teaching chambers to observe. Vishari scholars, their robes humming with kinetic glyphs, explained that Ashka's accelerated language development was unprecedented. No cub had spoken in complete intent phrases at this age. The translator collar had merely started the bridge. What shocked them was how quickly the cub had crossed it. She listened, absorbing their words but saying little. She already knew what they were discovering. She had watched Ashka adapt from the moment he stopped shivering. He didn't just copy behavior. He learned from meaning, not repetition. The high circle summoned her twice in that week. Not to question her, but to ask how she had taught him empathy. She explained she hadn't taught him anything directly. She had simply refused to treat him as lesser. When he growled, she didn't dominate. When he fled, she didn't pursue. She waited. Spoke softly. Gave space and time. They called it unnatural. She called it human. Eventually, she was allowed to walk the city unescorted. Vishari artisans bowed as she passed. Children watched her with round, luminescent eyes. Some approached cautiously, offering woven tokens, small gestures of gratitude. Word had spread far beyond the tribunal. She hadn't just saved a royal cub. She had changed him. But change brought consequences. There were factions unhappy with the tribunal's decision. Older bloodlines whispered that no alien, especially a human, should shape royal development. Rumors circled of unrest, of ancient laws invoked. The guardian title had never been meant for outsiders. It was a ceremonial position, once used to guide Vishari heirs in early growth, before war and fear had stripped the role of its function. To restore it now, and place it in alien hands, was heresy to some. The threat didn't shake her. What unsettled her was Ashka's awareness of it. One night, while reviewing nutrient synthesis patterns for Vishari biology, Ashka placed a clawed paw on her shoulder and spoke clearly. "You stay. Ashka, protect. All." The message wasn't vague. He wasn't trying to please her. He was asserting his intent, his loyalty. Not as pet to caretaker. As kin to kin. In the days that followed, she noticed changes in the city itself. Vishari officials began adapting structures in the sanctum to accommodate non-native physiology. Speech glyphs shifted to include simplified human English markers. Her food supply, once regulated tightly, now included fresh deliveries of Earth-adjacent proteins, specially grown in jungle labs. They were preparing, slowly but certainly, for something beyond tradition. The shift wasn't driven by policy. It was Ashka. The young heir began to issue direct declarations. Simple ones, but with heavy meaning. He would speak in front of elders and demand cooperation with the one who stayed. He would point to ancient scriptures and call for change, not in rebellion, but in evolution. And the elders listened. Some out of fear. Some out of awe. But all with attention. She remained reserved. Never claiming power, never seeking voice. But when asked, she answered. When invited, she shared. Not authority, experience. One morning, she was summoned to the temple's central tower. Ashka waited at the peak, surrounded by other younglings from noble families. He nodded toward her and presented her with a band of light-infused thread, woven not from cloth, but memories. It shimmered with stored resonance from their time together. A symbol of bond. Not ownership. Not command. Mutual permanence. She accepted. Not out of pride. Out of understanding. This was no longer rescue. It had become foundation. What began as accident had transformed into blueprint. Years passed quietly, though nothing remained the same. The jungle beyond the cliffs grew wilder as patrols were thinned. They no longer feared incursions from rival species or desperate scavengers. Ashka's influence had stretched across the region like roots beneath the surface, unseen but unshakable. Where once disputes were handled by force or exile, now they were resolved through dialogue, a process he insisted on emulating from her example. And she, now more than a mere guardian, stood at the edge of a society rewriting itself. Her presence had become ordinary, even expected. No longer an outsider, she served as an anchor within the ever-shifting structure the young leader was building. She never sought rank, yet found herself at the center of every pivotal decision. Councils began requesting her insights before declarations were passed. Not out of deference to her species, but because she was trusted, an anomaly among aliens. Ashka had grown large, his coat now a deep silver-black laced with glowing blue stripes across his limbs and tail, markings once thought symbolic of ancient bloodlines. He moved with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to prove anything. His vocabulary, both in native speech and hers, had grown beyond ceremonial language. He could dissect a treaty, debate strategy, and still refer to her in public as the one who stayed when none would. The phrase carried meaning now woven into law. Yet even in peace, tension hovered beneath the surface. Other planetary systems were watching. Reports of a Vishari heir adopting human customs caused diplomatic ripples. Offers came, cautious invitations from colonies and neutral sectors. Most were declined. Ashka wasn't ready to let his people dilute themselves for the comfort of others. But neither was he blind to the future. He needed a path forward. So he turned again to her. She developed programs within the city that trained younger Vishari in cross-species negotiation, empathy modeling, and adaptive reasoning. These were controversial, drawing backlash from conservative factions. Some argued that she was teaching weakness. Others whispered she was slowly converting the next generation. But as the graduates from her program stepped into leadership roles and conflicts dropped to their lowest recorded levels in Vishari history, resistance quieted into silence. Her influence didn't make her immune to loss. An accident in the lower mining tunnels claimed the lives of several apprentices she had mentored. Ashka mourned with her, not above her. He cancelled all public rituals for 3 days and sat beside her in stillness. No speeches. No symbols. Just presence. It was the first time she'd seen him weep. That moment changed the tempo of his reign. He began restructuring the Guardian Order, no longer symbolic or spiritual, but functional. Guardians were trained not just to protect, but to nurture, each assigned to a single developing cub, with absolute responsibility. The methods she had once improvised alone were now codified, tested, perfected. The bond she'd shared with him had become a model for all future leaders. On the 10th anniversary of Ashka's return to the cliffs, a gathering was held, not ceremonial, but unifying. Delegates from 5 systems attended, standing beneath the carved obsidian gates that marked the city's core. Ashka spoke in 3 languages, each line clear, concise, and deliberate. He promised openness, not submission. And he introduced her not as a hero, but as the proof of what could be rebuilt when instinct was tempered by compassion. After the speech, she stood with him at the platform's edge, watching as Vishari younglings played beneath light towers they once believed sacred. There was laughter, even singing, a sound she hadn't heard in her first years on the planet. Ashka turned to her and said simply, "We're not what we were. And neither are you." She didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. The moment said everything. They had both survived drowning, him in water, her in failure, and emerged reshaped. When the decision came to offer her citizenship, she declined it. She didn't need a title to remain. She had no interest in becoming another symbol. Her place was already woven into every step the people took towards something new. She preferred to walk behind, to observe, to teach when asked and remain silent when not. Ashka respected that. Always had. By the time her hair had begun to gray and her hands grew less steady, she had trained over 40 guardians. Not one had left their charge. Not one had failed. And every time the sun rose over the cliffs, lighting the mist in gold and sapphire, Ashka would greet her in the same way he always had since their bond began, head bowed slightly, voice steady. "Still here." And she would smile. Because she was.